Question 1041 is a word problem, and it says that a golfer hits a golf ball, and that golf ball follows the equation h equals negative 16t squared plus 80t, where t is the number of seconds that passes and h is the height of the golf ball. So if we look at this equation, we should by now in the course be able to quickly realize that the equation is a quadratic equation because it has a squared term, and that means it's going to be shaped like a parabola. And in this case, since a, or the coefficient of the quadratic term, the t squared, is negative, the parabola opens down. So if I wanted to quickly get a visual of what this graph looks like, here's t, here's h. We know the golf ball starts at 0, it's shaped like a parabola, and it lands. And this parabola is h equals negative 16t squared plus 80t. And the question A says, when does the ball land on the ground? So they're asking for this position. We already know this position, that's at 0. So in essence, they're asking us to find the roots, or the x-intercepts, or solve the quadratic equation when y, or in this case h, is 0. So we have a lot of methods to do that. We have negative 16t squared plus 80t, and we want to know when the height is 0. So there's, we learned 4 different methods. We could graph it and look on the graph. We could factor it and solve it that way. We could complete the square. We could use the quadratic formula. This one to me jumps out as factoring because I can factor out a GCF. In this case, I could factor out the negative 16t, and I'm left with t minus 5 equals 0. Now, the zero product property says that if I multiply two things together and I get 0, so in this case if I multiply this and this together and get 0, then either one of those two or both of them 0. So that means I can set negative 16t to be 0, or I could set t minus 5 to be 0. And this gives me, divide both sides by negative 16, right? Negative 16, divide by negative 16. And I get t equals 0, and that's where the golf ball started. And in this case, I add 5 to both sides, and I get t equals 5. So that means that this is 5 seconds. So the golf ball lands at 5 seconds, and the other one was 0 seconds. That's where the golfer hit the golf ball. And the second part of the question says, what's the maximum height of the ball during its flight? So we know that the maximum height is right in the middle because a parabola is symmetrical. So that means that at t of 2.5, because the middle of 0 and 5 is 2.5, or 2.5, the height at 2.5 is going to be the highest part. So if I already know the t, which is 2.5, and I want to get the height, I can substitute 2.5 into the original equation and solve for the height. So I get h equals negative 16 times 2.5 squared plus 80 times 2.5, right? And if I solve that, I square 2.5, multiply by negative 16, and add that to 80 times 2.5, I get 100. So the maximum height is at 100 feet, and it occurs at 2.5 seconds into the flight. So that's the maximum height, and the ball lands at 5 seconds. And we've solved both part A and part B.